The wind carried grit that night, a storm of dust rolling down the main street, rattling loose shutters and stinging the eyes of those who dared to linger outside. Somewhere in the noise of it, the sound of shears bit through the hush, sharp, deliberate, final. A young woman's hair fell in rough clumps to the ground. Hands smeared soot across her cheeks, pressing it into her skin, as though to mark her forever. There was no scream, no protest, only the stillness of a heart breaking where everyone could see. I tell you, there are cruelties in this world that wound deeper than any bullet, cruelties that turn a body into a shadow of itself. Her name was Clara May Whitfield, barely 26, widowed before she had learned what it meant to be a wife. Her husband had been crushed beneath a falling steer on the Whitfield ranch, leaving her without children, without protection, and without worth in the eyes of his family. They called her barren, cursed, a burden too heavy for their household. So they did what they thought would cleanse their shame. They cut off her long hair, blackened her face with chimney soot, and turned her into a spectacle. The townsfolk gathered with lowered voices and raised eyebrows. Some men laughed behind calloused hands, some women whispered behind bonnets. Clara stood still beneath it all, trembling, humiliation echoing in her bones like the hollow ring of church bells. When it was over, they told her to leave. The Whitfield land was no longer hers to walk. So Clara stumbled through the town's edges, half blind with tears, her hair hacked uneven, her face caked in the residue of ridicule. People averted their gaze as though her shame might be catching, as though if they met her eyes they would see their own cruelties reflected back. She sat by a leaning fence, clutching the small Bible her husband had once held during supper readings. The pages were worn soft, but no words inside could shield her from the ache that had settled in her chest. It was there that a shadow broke across her. Not one of the townsfolk who had turned their backs, but taller, broader, a presence that seemed carved from stone and storm alike. He was an Apache, towering, shoulders like the beams of a cabin, his face lined with scars that told of battles long endured. The town feared him, whispered names meant to make him less than human, giant, savage, threat. Yet he stood silent, his dark eyes fixed on Clara, with neither ridicule nor pity. She felt her throat tighten. She expected insult, expected the lash of another cruelty. Instead, his voice came low, steady, heavy with something she could not name. "You're coming with me." Nothing more, nothing less. He did not reach for her, did not force his hand upon her. His presence was the only rope he cast, and yet it felt as binding as iron. Clara shook her head faintly, shame flooding back. How could she go with him, when even her own blood had cast her out? Yet when she looked at him, at the scars across his hands and the patience in his stance, she saw no malice. He bent once, setting a canteen at her feet. Then he stepped back, waiting. Thirst burned in her throat. Her hands trembled as she reached, unscrewed the cap, and drank. Coolness slid down into her stomach, startling her with its relief. When she lifted her eyes again, he was still there, still waiting, as if the world had not moved at all. Slowly, with the weight of exhaustion pressing every step, Clara rose. She did not understand why her feet carried her forward, only that staying behind meant withering where she stood. Whispers followed them as they walked beyond the last lamp of town, her figure small and bent, his a towering silhouette that seemed to consume the dusk. They moved into the wild places, where brush clawed at her skirts, and the sun pressed down like a brand. Clara stumbled, her scalp raw beneath the hacked ends of her hair. He walked ahead, silent, steady, but always near enough to turn when she faltered. He showed her water hidden in cactus, shared dried venison without a word, shielded her when coyotes howled in the night. There was no gentleness in the way he carried himself, but no cruelty either, only a kind of enduring strength she had never known. As the first day fell into night, they built a small fire. Clara sat wrapped in a borrowed blanket, the smoke curling against a sky stitched with stars. He sat apart, sharpening a blade, the steel flashing like a quiet promise. Fear still trembled inside her, but alongside it, something else, an unfamiliar safety, fragile and trembling. She thought of the laughter of her in-laws, the hiss of scissors against her hair. And then she looked at him, this silent giant who asked nothing but her company. Sometimes I've learned it takes being cast out by your own blood to stumble into the hands that were meant to hold you. And so Clara's exile became her beginning, lit by firelight and the slow, uncertain steps of trust. Morning rose pale and silver, Dew gathered on the grass where Clara had slept beneath the blanket he had given her. She touched her cropped hair, still jagged from the shears, and for the first time in days she did not feel the sting of shame. At a creek he had led her to, she knelt and washed her face until the soot slid away in black rivulets. The water was cold, shocking against her skin, yet left her lighter, as if she were shedding not just dirt, but the memory of their laughter. He said nothing, only watched from a distance the giant whose silence felt less like absence and more like a kind of reverence. Clara learned the rhythm of the wild because he showed her, not with words, but with gestures, with patience. How to gather kindling and strike flint until a flame was born. How to follow deer tracks that threaded through the brush. How to drink from a stream without stirring the silt. Each lesson was a thread in a fabric she had not known she was weaving. She was no longer a woman tossed aside, but a body capable of survival, her own hands steadying the world around her. Yet word traveled even to the loneliest hills. From passing riders came whispers that the Whitfields bragged of ridding themselves of their curse, that the widow had run off with a savage. Some said she had gone mad. The cruelty of those lies struck Clara sharper than any blade. Her breath shivered in her chest as if the townsfolk still stood before her with soot in their fists. But when her eyes met his, the pain loosened its grip. He reached into his pouch and drew out a single feather, mottled and strong, laying it in her palm without a word. A gesture so small, yet it steadied her as no Bible verse had. Nights deepened their strange companionship. She would watch him carve wood with steady hands, the firelight catching in the hollows of his face. She noticed the way he lifted his eyes to the stars, not in worship, but in quiet knowing. One evening, her own hands restless, she braided a thin strap of leather for his knife. When she offered it, his fingers brushed hers as he took it. His eyes, usually hard as stone, softened for the briefest flicker. It was not love as the world told it, but something slower, quieter, growing in the spaces between words. Danger came at dusk. Bandits with laughter sharp as broken glass, jeering as they circled. Look at her, one spat, run off with a savage giant. Clara's blood froze, her legs threatening to fail her. Yet when one of them reached for her arm, instinct rose. She seized a burning branch from the fire and swung, the flame hissing through the air. The man reeled back with a curse. In the chaos, Nakai moved like a storm, swift and merciless, his strength cutting through their jeers until the desert fell silent again. Breathless, Clara stood with the branch still smoldering in her hand. The fear had not vanished, but beneath it throbbed something else, fierce and undeniable. For the first time, she had not hidden. She had fought. And when Nakai's dark gaze fell on her, it was as though he was seeing not the shamed widow, but the flame she carried inside. Weeks passed before she spoke the words. She must return. Not to live among them, but to face them. To take back the piece of herself they had stripped away. Nakai did not argue. He walked beside her, a silent shadow across the wide land, until the town's roofs rose again on the horizon. The whispers started before her feet, touched the street. Short hair, proud stride, no soot upon her face. She was not the broken woman they had sent away. Clara walked to the Whitfield house, her heart steady, though her hands trembled at her sides. The in-laws spilled out onto the porch, sneers curling their mouths. Look who crawled back, one taunted. Laughter rippled. But Clara did not weep, did not bow her head. You cut my hair, she said, her voice low but clear enough for the crowd that had gathered. You blackened my face. But you did not take my dignity. The words struck like stones in a still pond. Gasps whispered through the watchers. And then Nakai stepped forward. He did not speak. He didn't need to. His size, his silence, his scarred strength seemed to press the air itself into quiet. A Whitfield cousin lunged, red-faced, reaching for her with rage. Nakai's arm rose, catching him with ease, holding him as though he weighed nothing. The man thrashed, but was Clara's touch that calmed the storm, her hand resting gently on Nakai's arm, not in fear, but in trust. She did not shrink, she did not flinch. And in that moment, the crowd saw her not as a discarded widow, but as a woman transformed. She turned away then, walking down the dusty street with Nakai at her side. Step by step, she left behind their judgment, their cruelty, their chains. The crowd did not follow. The whispers fell silent. The dust rose behind them like a veil closing on the past. Sometimes life will strip you bare, shear away the hair you thought made you beautiful, blacken your face with shame until you no longer recognize the woman in the mirror. But sometimes mercy comes scarred and quiet, speaking only in gestures, carrying no promise but the strength to walk beside you. And when such a mercy finds you, when it looks you in the eyes and says, "You're coming with me," do not look back. Walk on,